I'm Jimmy Fallon.
I'm Madison Allworth.
I'm Bill Hemmer, and this is the Fox News Rundown.
Wednesday, April 19th, 2023. I'm Jessica Rosenthal. Another deep dive into COVID's origins. This one from Senate Republicans also concludes it was likely an accidental lab leak that sparked the pandemic and that it all happened earlier than we thought.
The preponderance of evidence shows that this virus was accidentally released from a laboratory in Wuhan, China. If they want to own it or not, they're playing political games.
We speak with Kansas Republican Senator Roger Marshall.
I'm Dave Anthony. It's been 30 years now since an FBI raid on a compound in Waco, Texas turned deadly, ending a 51-day siege. We talked to a retired ATF agent who was at the first raid that started it all.
The first shot I heard clearly came from inside the compound. It was a muffled kind of a shot, but it was immediately followed by dozens and then quickly turned into hundreds of shots.
And I'm Greg Jarrett. I've got the final word on the Fox News Rundown.
A report compiled by doctors along with the GOP's Help Committee staff and released by Kansas Republican Senator Roger Marshall concludes COVID likely originated from the Wuhan Institute of Virology in China and was accidentally released. The FBI and Department of Energy came to the same conclusion, but this 300-page report, now public, aggregates all the details, including reports about a bad flu season around Wuhan beginning as early as October of 2019, an order for new HVAC equipment for a part of the lab in September of 2019, a Chinese government drill in Wuhan, quote, at its international airport that included identifying and responding to an arriving passenger infected with a novel coronavirus, also in September of 2019. The report dives into the genetic sequence of the virus, the type of research the Wuhan Institute was conducting, that it was well known, the concerns about safety at the lab preceding the pandemic, and numerous other details. The report dropped as the House Oversight and Accountability Select Subcommittee on the coronavirus pandemic began a hearing on the matter, chaired by Ohio Republican Congressman Brad Wenstrup.
What is clear, though, is that China does not want the globe to know the origins. They dodge and duck every legitimate attempt to investigate this question. According to the fact sheet, China has systematically prevented a transparent and thorough investigation of the COVID-19 pandemic's origin.
Democrats, like Ranking Member Raul Ruiz of Maryland, reminded the committee that most U.S. agencies still believe COVID has a natural origin and likely did not leak from a lab.
As it stands, there is no consensus. The reports are inconclusive and more research is needed. While our scientists and intelligence communities continue their investigations, it is crucial that we empower them to do so without extreme partisan rhetoric.
However, according to the Star Witness, former Director of National Intelligence John Ratcliffe, the only theory that makes sense is a lab leak, and the new Senate GOP report concurs.
So this is a committee report from the GOP Help folks.
Kansas Republican Senator Roger Marshall.
What it showed is there's a preponderance of evidence that supports that this virus and this epidemic started from a laboratory in Wuhan, China, that it was an accidental lab leak. In fact, there was probably two leaks, one in probably September 2019. They were able to contain that. They began doing research on the vaccines in November of 2019, and that's probably when the more significant leak occurred that led to the worldwide pandemic that killed millions of people. Secondly, there's significant evidence to support that this virus was made in one of those laboratories. And finally, this report really dispels the thought that this could have come from nature, that when a virus comes from nature, a natural spillover event, it should have left a trail, a footprint, and this virus didn't do that. We've waited 3 years on China to show us more data. They continue to hide it, including a DNA lab bank. But that's the highlight. This virus was an accidental release from a laboratory in Wuhan, China. Most likely was made in that laboratory. And this theory of the natural spillover just doesn't have much legs to stand on.
You're a medical doctor. For those of us who are not, what did you find to be maybe or perhaps the most compelling evidence? Like, was it the way the virus itself looked? Was it that people who'd worked at that lab had been hospitalized, or was it something entirely new?
Right. I think it's the preponderance of evidence that I would emphasize. Again, as a physician, I'm an OBGYN. If I have a patient with a problem, I get consultations. So in this particular case, we call in the intelligence committee. Let's look at all the intelligence reports. Why are they setting up roadblocks around this Wuhan lab in September, October of 2019? Why is all their decreased cell phone activity going on? Next is the epidemiology of it. The epidemiology of this fits more with an accidental lab release than it does something from nature. Next, I would talk about the science of this, that the day this virus showed up, it was perfectly made to infect human lung cells.
What do you conclude as the significance for the lack of information? Former head of intelligence John Ratcliffe told a House hearing Tuesday, we don't have an environmental source identified. We don't have an intermediate host. There is no reservoir species identified. And COVID was never known to have existed in any animal or species before it began. How significant is that, the missing information?
Well, I think it's very significant, and Ratcliffe makes a great point. When you set out this theory, and that's what we do as scientists, we say, here's the theory. Let's say this came from nature and it was a natural spillover. There should be evidence like you just described. The reservoir, they should be able to find the bats where this came from. The next, they should have been able to find an intermediate species. And to date, not one animal has tested positive for this that was from the Hussein market there where they said that this virus started from. And it's the lack of showing us the DNA. If they open their books, and they've got it, this is these people's life work. Dr. Shi, her life's work was playing with these viruses. They went around the world collecting bat viruses, and they were playing with them. They were taking off protein spikes from one virus, adding it to another backbone, and they were doing it in biosecurity levels, labs 2 and 3, which are just, this is the wrong place to do it. It just scares me to death as a scientist. But you're right. If they would show us all that information, if they would show us what viruses they were breeding to one another, I'm sure it would show us exactly where COVID-19 came from.
We know agencies are investigating COVID origins, and most of them have concluded with low confidence that they still think this was a natural occurrence, despite the FBI and Department of Energy saying that they think it came from a lab. How does your report fit into all of this? Did you pull from some of these agencies' findings? Did you gather wholly separate new information?
So all of the above. So certainly the folks, and I want to give Dr. Bob Kadlec credit for leading this charge. He looked at classified information. He looked at unclassified information, FOIA information, anything and everything that we could get our hands on. Look, the FBI and the DOE, Department of Energy, are uniquely situated to give an opinion, which I would agree with, because they have the scientists and they can go talk to witnesses, especially the FBI. So they have the type of scientists to understand this. I think there's a handful of the agencies would have said they don't have an opinion one way or the other. And to be honest, they're a bunch of gutless wonders, that they're not willing to make a statement that they're afraid it'll be politicized. I think, again, the preponderance of evidence shows that this virus was accidentally released from a laboratory in Wuhan, China. If they want to own it or not, they're playing political games.
At the House hearing Tuesday, Dr. Mark Lowenthal, the minority witness, he told lawmakers, we just may never know. We have to recognize that so many agencies, our own intelligence agencies, still think this occurred naturally, even if DOE and FBI have more uniquely qualified people to make that assessment. But is there a way in your mind, after you've compiled this report, is there a way to come to a totally solid conclusion where there's no doubt without help from China? If we don't have the evidence and we don't have the cooperation, we may never get it. Can we still come to a more solid conclusion?
So, Jessica, that's a cop-out. There is certainly enough evidence that we would get a conviction in a civil case, okay? Even just China's destroying of evidence and killing witnesses, all these witnesses that would be helped are dying. The person that was working on the vaccine for China, he's mysteriously died in June of 2020 as well. To get a criminal conviction beyond a shadow of a doubt, I don't think so. Not unless China is willing to cooperate. But that does not excuse the United States government from doing what we're doing. Why in the world would we be giving money to laboratories in Wuhan, China to do research that's more powerful, that's killed more people than nuclear bombs have? Then we don't properly monitor it. We don't have scientists over there. There's so much to learn from this, regardless if we can prove it beyond a shadow of a doubt. But I really do think that this report shows the preponderance of evidence says that this virus was an unintentional lab leak in Wuhan, China.
We know Chinese officials say any conclusion that this came from a lab is politicized, political manipulation. Is there fear here regarding consequence? Like what would or could consequences be, and should they be, if this is the case?
Right. So I call this the gain-of-function mafia, led by Dr. Fauci and Dr. Collins, that they and this group of scientists for 20 years have spent billions of dollars. I mean, your listeners need to understand Fauci oversaw a $6 billion a year industry of awarding grant money, and he was able to leverage that with the Clinton Foundation and Gates Foundation monies as well. Then he would leverage it with the Department of Defense monies and USAID monies. EcoHealth is the middle of this gain-of-function mafia as well. So the consequences is that we end this game of spending billions of dollars that's actually killed millions of people and has given us no benefit. So, the jig's up, so to speak. I think that's part of it. And then politically, the United States has to own this as well, that we were, again, financing this for years. And more than just financing it, we gave them the intellectual property. We taught them how to put on these protein spikes taken from one virus and putting it on another. We taught them how to use this urine cleavage site as well. So it's the intellectual property, it's the money, and the fear is this. The PLA and the CCP are intertwined so much in this research, and China itself says, look, this is a bioterrorism weapon, that they have concerns for their national security, and they're going to respond to that threat by developing countermeasures as well as offensive measures. So as China goes about this process of collecting the DNA of every human, every plant, and every animal in the world, there's good things they can do with that, and there's bad things they can do with it.
So, Senator, then what do you say to Dr. Fauci, who says this is just a flat-out lie? We were not funding gain-of-function research there. I mean, I think it was even referenced in the House hearing Tuesday that he told Rand Paul, he told Senator Paul, no such thing occurred, even if EcoHealth Alliance did get some grant money and was working with the Wuhan lab, that these flat denials from the folks that were in charge of NIH.
Right. So even the NIH is now calling this gain-of-function research. And our document illustrates exactly when they decided that what they were funding with EcoHealth was gain-of-function research. It's a year 5 grant report that was submitted about a year late. And then they even changed the gain-of-function. So this is the point. The NIH has manipulated the gain-of-function research definition to suit whatever it darn well fit them and what they thought it needed to be. And even today, we're continuing to fund viral gain-of-function research in China, as well as some of our own laboratories. And we need to stop it until we get our hands around it. So I think that no one in America is going to sit there and believe Dr. Fauci when he says this was not gain-of-function research. It clearly was. It meets the classic definition of making a virus more transmissible as well as more virulent. That's exactly what SARS-CoV-2 was, and they're continuing to do it in China, and I'm afraid even in laboratories in America as we speak.
Senator Marshall, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks so much.
This is Greg Jarrett with your Fox News commentary coming up.
April 19th is an infamous day to critics of the U.S. government because of what happened 30 years ago. The FBI conducted a raid in Waco, Texas to end a 51-day siege at the Branch Davidian compound. But as they went in and fired tear gas, fires broke out, and 76 people inside were killed, including the religious sect's leader and 22 kids.
The offender there was David Koresh. And I do not think the United States government is responsible for the fact that a bunch of fanatics decided to kill themselves. And I'm sorry that they killed their children.
Former President Clinton was in office at the time, but some claim, including Branch Davidian survivors, the FBI was to blame after botching negotiations to end the standoff peacefully.
The FBI and ATF were brought to task in front of Congress and the American people.
That's from a new Fox Nation special called Scandalous Waco.
After all the hearings, trials, and media coverage, what happened at Waco remains hotly debated.
So is how it all started. That is the sound of the first raid that led to the siege when the ATF tried to arrest the leader, Koresh, who was accused of sexually assaulting girls and having an arsenal of weapons.
Very seldom does a day go by that I don't think about those events.
Blake Boatler was there that day. He's now a retired ATF senior special agent.
I think about the cost, the human cost in lives, and not only just from the Branch Davidian sides and the ATF agents that were killed, but when you look at the Oklahoma City bombing that Timothy McVeigh did just 2 years to the day after April 19th, when the compound burned, 168 more people were killed. And the way it's affected and polarized people in the United States over these past 30 years.
Let's go back to how it all started. It was February 28 of 1993, and you guys conducted a raid on this compound. What happened?
We drove down, from Fort Hood to Waco early that morning. We had notified an ambulance service, and one of the people in the ambulance service notified the media that we were in the process of doing this warrant. And one of the media people was out there driving around early that morning around 9 o'clock and got lost. And when they located a rural postman there, they asked them where the Branch Davidians were, and that postman turned out to be a Branch Davidian. And he told them the ATF and the National Guard were serving the warrant. So he went back and told David Koresh that ATF and the National Guard were coming. And we had an undercover agent in there at the time who came out and alerted our command staff that, hey, they know we're coming. And the tactical commander came in and said, hey, he knows we're coming. He's shaking. He's holding the Bible. He said, they got me once. They'll never get me again. But I think we can still do this thing, is what he said. So most of us were like in shock, thinking, well, if they know we're coming, why are we going forward with this? Since the element of surprise is critical in a dynamic entry such as we were planning.
Right. And they know that they know their compound, so they can be ready at any spot.
Yeah, and that's absolutely what happened. Unbeknownst to us, all their weapons had already been handed out. We were under the false premise that the weapons were all locked up in a gun room, which was the way it had been many months before. But since Child Protective Services had already been investigating Koresh and talking to him about him molesting and raping the young girls, he was on notice that eventually we would be coming. And so they'd handed out the guns. So in that 46 minutes between the time that Koresh was notified that we were coming and the time that we actually arrived there, they had 46 minutes to get everything planned, to get their guns, get to their windows, and wait for our arrival.
So then what happens? You show up and what?
So as we pulled down into the compound and we stopped, it's just as soon as the doors opened up, the gunfire started. And the first shot I heard clearly came from inside the compound. It was a muffled kind of a shot, but it was immediately followed by dozens and then quickly turned into hundreds of shots. One of the big things that I've been asked, Dave, is who fired first? Mm-hmm. Who fired first? That's mm-hmm. the big question. And of course, the Davidians say that ATF fired first. And, we as ATF, we say, well, we're certain that they fired first. But there were some objective people out there that morning. And those were the reporters from KWTX and the reporters from the Waco Tribune Herald. And to the man, each one of them in their statements stated that the Branch Davidians fired first and that they ambushed ATF.
4 agents were killed. I believe 6 Branch Davidians were killed.
This gunfight, it lasted 112 minutes.
Wow, a long time.
And most law enforcement gunfights, I think on average, are somewhere around 7 seconds. I think the Texas Rangers estimated that ATF fired around 1,100 rounds of ammunition in that time period, and the Branch Davidians fired 10,000 rounds. How
did only 4 agents get hit?
Well, we like to think God was on our side in that respect. Sadly, we lost 4 guys, but how we didn't lose more, we don't know. Many agents were shot in the head that had helmets, and so the bullets ricocheted off the helmets. We had one agent who had a backup pistol over his chest, and a round hit that backup pistol. Had it not hit the pistol and gone 2 inches higher, it would have gone through his chest and killed him.
What about you? Did you get a bullet near you?
The bullets were everywhere. I saw an agent that was, I couldn't tell if he was dead or wounded to the left of the front doors at this time, and several agents were moving to positions of cover to the right, and so I was giving them some cover fire. Someone in a window above with a machine gun fired down on me and then raked the sidewalk in front of me, and it splattered my face with concrete and bullet shrapnel. So it just nicked my face. I wouldn't even call it being wounded. But then I had to move to a position of cover after that. So
you are lucky.
No, and I think we're lucky, if you want to call it that, looked after, however you want to perceive it. But yeah, many people were lucky that day. Some of the misconceptions, people believed that ATF at that time was that we were armed with machine guns and that we were this heavily armed group, when in fact, almost half of the agents were only armed with a 9mm pistol. No agents had fully automatic machine guns, none. We did not come looking for a gunfight. We came looking to serve this lawful search warrant for machine guns and hand grenades and an arrest warrant for David Koresh for the possession of those.
What if you didn't go in? I mean, you said the commander said your commander thought you could do it.
Yeah, well, that's right. In the initial planning phase, we discussed what was the best plan. Was it to do a dynamic warrant service, which is what we tried that morning, or do we do what ended up happening, which was a siege? And the reason that we moved away from the siege concept was that they had months, if not years, of food inside the compound. And all the people that we interviewed that had come out of there said that if you surround them, trap them in there, they will commit mass suicide. And in the end, 51 days later, that's exactly what they did. They lit the compound on fire when they thought that the FBI was coming in, and they killed themselves.
Of course, Branch Davidian survivors and government critics dispute that. They blame the FBI and Attorney General Janet Reno. Her testimony is included in the Fox Nation Waco special.
The plan was designed to induce serious negotiations or the evacuation of the compound with extremely limited risk that agents would harm any of the occupants or be harmed themselves. We announced repeatedly to those within the compound that there would be no attempt to enter the compound by federal agents.
Some claim tear gas the FBI fired into the compound could have started those fires.
They had agreed in their gas plan that if the branch division started shooting at the tanks, potentially going to try to shoot the agents, that they would then put in all the gas that they had. So that's when they fired what they call CS ferret rounds. And these are 40mm rounds that are fired from a little handheld gun. Now, what happens is these things go through the windows and then they hit the wall and then they crack open, and it's not really powder. It's more like particles come out.
Okay.
They're non-flammable at all. This stuff is what we call blast dispersion. It hits the wall and then breaks apart, and then the particles spread around as the wind blows through and things like that.
Okay, but when they're launched, is any of the material, the casing, anything, is it hot? Could it spark anything?
The main building only had the regular CS blast dispersion canisters. They don't have anything that can start a fire at all. Law enforcement every day in America uses CS gas on barricaded suspects that are in houses, things like that. The branch divisions had 51 days to come out, but they never would. It could have gone on potentially for months, maybe even a year. So they were hopeful that the gas would make things uncomfortable and that they would knock holes in the wall and the branch divisions would be able to leave. But that is not what happened. You can hear on some of the tapes when they see the gas coming, they say, put on your masks, put on your masks. So they want to stay in there. And then you can also hear them say, spread the fuel. I need more fuel over here. And then the fires start. And if you'll know, there's 3 different points of origin that the fire starts almost simultaneously that are quite a distance from one another. So that's indicative of people purposely starting fires at different locations in the building.
They have a Branch Davidian Survivors Waco group on Facebook, and they warn members. They warn people not to trust anybody. And media who's trying to look into this 30 years later, they say, trust no one. They still believe you as the government, you working for the ATF and then later the FBI, were always the aggressors. You try to go in on February 28th, Then you go in on April 19 and they say you killed all these people and these kids.
Right.
It's still the message. And people have, as you pointed out, Timothy McVeigh, people who believe that the government is the aggressor have used that against the government in the years since.
All I can do is speak the facts that I know, that I lived through, and that I've seen. And it's pretty clear what happened. In the end, one of the questions I'm always asked is, well, do you believe David Koresh really thought that he was the Messiah? Or do you just believe he was a con man? In my opinion, he's a guy that believed that he didn't want to go to prison for being a pedophile and being a guy in possession of all these machine guns.
Blake Boatler, retired ATF senior special agent and special response team commander, also part of the scandalous Waco special on Fox Nation. There are 3 episodes there, and Blake, of course, was there for what happened at the start of the 51-day siege 30 years ago. Blake, thanks very much for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Dave.
In other news,
I'm Gianna Gelosi. Do you live in a big city and feel like your dollar doesn't go as far as it should? You might be on to something. According to a new study by Smart Asset, investment advisor company, the average American would need to earn at least $300,000 per year to meet the demands and cost of living in cities like New York and Honolulu. It's a huge leap from just 5 years ago when a 6-figure salary was considered an important milestone for workers. In New York City, a $100,000 salary amounts to about $35,791 when you consider taxes and cost of living. Honolulu, it amounts to $36,026. San Francisco takes the spot for 3rd priciest city. By contrast, the cities that go the farthest on a $100,000 salary include Memphis, Tennessee, where it amounts to more than $86,000 after taxes and cost of living. 7 of the top 10 cities are in Texas, with El Paso taking the 2nd spot and Houston in 6th place. For the Fox News Rundown, I'm Gianna Gelosi.
new from the Fox News Podcasts Network.
I'm Dana Perino. Join me for Season 3 of my limited-time podcast, Everything Will Be Okay, based on my best-selling book of the same name. Make sure you subscribe to this series wherever you download podcasts and leave a rating and review.
Subscribe to this podcast at foxnewspodcasts.com.
It's time for your Fox News commentary.
Greg Jarrett.
What's on your mind?
Joe Biden's history as a serial fabulist exceeds even today's shameful standards of habitual lying in Washington. The president's repeated insistence that he never discussed with Hunter his overseas business dealings, let alone with his partners, is belied by indisputable evidence that has grown exponentially over time. Yet the elder Biden maintains the ludicrous charade. Recently, Fox News uncovered records showing that Hunter's associates in his suspected influence peddling schemes frequented the White House more than 80 times when his father was vice president. Biden's persistent claim that he had no knowledge of his son's foreign dealings and never spoke with him about it defies logic and common sense. Even Hunter disputes it, admitting to the New Yorker that he did talk with his father about his lucrative venture in Ukraine that netted some $11 million. An audio tape surfaced in which Joe Biden is heard discussing a pending news article about his son's suspicious Chinese deals and informing his son, "I think you're clear." Authenticated emails confirm that Joe Biden attended numerous meetings and dinners with many of Hunter's foreign investors and business partners. Photographs corroborate it, and there are messages thanking Hunter for arranging meetings with his dad. The two flew to China together aboard Air Force Two, where Joe met with his son's business cohorts. Just days later, Hunter cemented a lucrative venture with a Beijing investment firm. The entwining of Biden's finances with foreign adversaries raises grave concerns about national security, counterintelligence, and potential extortion of our current president. Have our country's defense and economic interests been jeopardized? It seems so. This is precisely why Republican-led congressional committees are now investigating what Democrats refuse to probe. The role of Congress is all the more vital because it's clear that both the FBI and the DOJ are running interference for the Bidens. Despite written demands by members of Congress, Attorney General Merrick Garland refuses to appoint a special counsel while ignoring regulations that require him to recuse himself. The FBI has had custody of Hunter's computer hard drive for 4 years. It appears to have been buried deep in a vault, never to see the light of day. Meanwhile, the U.S. Attorney in Delaware has been investigating for 5 years. Not a single charge has been brought, despite incriminating evidence. None is expected. The accumulated evidence of wrongdoing is overwhelming. Emails, witness statements, visitor logs, and other records make it abundantly clear that Joe Biden was complicit in his son's shady multi-million-dollar influence peddling operations. With much of the government bureaucracy aligned in solidarity to protect the president and his family, Congress is now the only avenue by which the truth can be unraveled. I'm Greg Jarrett for Fox News.
You've been listening to the Fox News Rundown. And now, stay up to date by subscribing to this podcast at foxnewspodcasts.com. Listen ad-free on Fox News Podcasts Plus on Apple Podcasts. And Prime members can listen to the show ad-free on Amazon Music. And for up-to-the-minute news, go to foxnews.com.
Hey, it's Will Kane, co-host of Fox & Friends Weekend. Join me as I share my thoughts on a wide range of topics, from sports and pop culture to politics and business.
The Will Kane Podcast. Subscribe and listen now at foxnewspodcasts.com or wherever you get your podcasts.
Love Fox News? Click the subscribe button to get more of the news and opinion you trust. And click the Fox News Rundown playlist for the latest episodes.